Let's talk about album titles. They effectively play the same role as book titles, yet they don't get the same credit. Many listeners treat them the same way as the various names for chocolate chip cookies at the supermarket. Likewise, we have artists who keep the same shtick for several projects, which are often named after individual songs or even the artists themselves. However, I'm more interested in album titles with significance of their own, like Captain Beefheart's Trout Mask Replica. Perhaps it was simply named after the cover photo, but I think those words, Trout Mask Replica, represent the Captain Beefheart we know and love coming to the surface. Likewise, the title of Jandek's Glad to Get Away accomplishes what none of his prior ones could. It conveys an emotion behind his work before we even turn it on. Seth Tissue called it an older but wiser record, and Jandek might have been stepping away for a new perspective, hence the gladness. It reminds me of how the Beatles composed the White Album. The Getting Away approach resulted in some wonderful songs on that record, while Glad to Get Away is the gold standard of Jandek's third era. It is quite reminiscent of Graven Image, and I even thought of reviewing both of them together. But on this one, I just think he went the extra mile. He really knocks the standout tracks out of the park, and there's this string of tracks in the first half that has always fascinated me. While Graven Image had more quirks to it, there's something about the songwriting here that makes me just a bit more likely to turn it on. However, there are some other differences to note. You might recall some subtle reverb on the last album, which probably had to do with where he recorded it, but this time it's barely noticeable. But on tracks 9 and 10, Jandek brings back the echo effect he used on songs like Whiskers from 12th Apostle. Fans had to get used to this because it would be far more prominent on the next two records. As for guitar, the tuning is slightly different once again, and it sounds like Jandek's trying to incorporate more lead into the usual acoustic style. You'll notice that on some of the earlier tracks, while others even feature little riffs that make the music more distinct. This record's intro song, Bitter Tale, is not as lyrically profound as last time. I guess it just establishes a vague plot line for the album, but it compensates with that newer playing style. Then along comes one of the best-known tracks, and I think maybe 75% of that fame has to do with the line, "Hey mister, can you tell me, is there a knife stuck in your face?" My friends, that certainly is the million-dollar question. If taken literally, it must mean the narrator is having a phone conversation, so he can't see the guy's face. However, I think it's more likely that the guy has been through so much that his face is starting to show it, and mentioning the knife is part of Jandek's dark sense of humor in that situation. Anyway, almost half the lyrics are questions, usually of the rhetorical variety, since they help us imagine this new character. Counting shadows and having the shivers betray a paranoid temperament, but the line about matchbook covers confuses me in the classic Jandekian way. Apparently, this unnamed character keeps making a scene, so naturally most lyrics in the last minute sound like suggestions to make this guy blend in a little more. We've heard character-driven Jandek songs, but let me remind you that writing a character is also a way to talk about yourself, so there is some ambiguity to this track. Have fun with it. On Ezekiel, Jandek once again directs our attention to the Bible. The titular prophet had his own Old Testament book in which he predicted the fall of Jerusalem. That would have been cool to hear about, but these lyrics are just as vague as ever, so they might refer to a different Ezekiel. Also, it sure makes a lot of sense to say, "Ezekiel, I don't know your name." However, what makes me enjoy the song is that guitar playing, again, which was toned down on the last track. Next is a song I posted years ago, and it should not be confused with the Van Morrison song of the same name. Moon Dance is a sort of resurrection song, which is shown by the first line in an interesting way.
I got life and death stains on my pants.
Apparently, the gift of life was returned to Jandek, only for him to ask if he was in hell. Life versus death is a topic with a lot of potential, but it's not explored later on, where the lyrics just meander a bit. However, Jandek gets some extra credit because I don't think the phrase bloody mountain chasing desert running freaks had ever been uttered in the history of the world. And also, the last sentence is pretty cool. I would say Moondance is a bit underrated. Although the next one is called Flowers on My Shirt, I always think of it as the finger song, due to a certain line that comes out of left field. It's hard to make sense of this one, but I think it takes place in some kind of ancient building, since apparently Jesus had been there. I slightly prefer the song Morning Drum because of its descending guitar riff on the high strings. The topic of waiting is reminiscent of For You and I from Graven Image, except this time Jandek is uncertain as to how long he must wait. Note the phrase waiting in the evening sun, part of which would be a song title on the next album. Now, if you think Glad to Get Away has somehow been making too much sense, along comes Down Clown. That title has always intrigued me. At first it seems like another way to say sad clown, but it actually refers to the part where this clown slips and falls down. Everything else makes little sense, but you can tell that it's another song aimed at one of Jandek's misfit friends. Also, I give Jandek credit for coining the phrase honest as chalk, since I sometimes use it to describe people who are obviously lying. Up next is my first taste of this record, and my opinion of it has stayed pretty constant since then. Rain in Madison is one of the less cryptic Jandek songs, in that it depicts a situation most of us are familiar with, even if we haven't all been to Madison. The narrator is sitting in his parked car while it's pouring outside, and it sounds like he's trying to meet with his friend. It was a long drive, too, so you can imagine his frustration with the inopportune weather.
Yes, I'm sitting here in my car. Drove a long, long way, but I didn't have no rain until today.
Presumably with no umbrella or raincoat, the narrator would rather delay the visit than maneuver through this kind of rain. Plus, the last sentence implies that he has some electrical devices that can't get wet, which I always assumed were amplifiers. While the narrator may not be too happy, I love imagining myself in his shoes, but not having anywhere to go. I would just be enjoying the comfort of my automotive womb. Plus, there's just something about Jandek's rain songs that make any album better. Out of the two echoey songs, I only recommend Anticipation, which is about some country girl Jandek likes. She's a sight to behold with her nice legs and fancy red shoes, but there's a contradiction regarding her skin color. First he claims she's a black girl, and then later he describes her skin as pure ivory, so maybe she's multiracial. She has a rebellious personality, especially in the city, but she's also active at church and makes an honest living as a waitress. The track ends with a surprising cliffhanger as Jandek proposes to her, which might be what the title is about. The more I listen to Anticipation, the more I want to meet that girl, so I guess the song is growing on me. Also, we can't rule out the possibility that it's about Nancy, especially since her name is in the next song title. As the lone instrumental on the record, Nancy Knows is a real treat for fans of Jandek's guitar improv. It's hit or miss for me, but I always stay for the first 30 seconds since it has a nice beat to it. Take My Will is another song that appears twice in the catalog, so of course it's a classic. What makes this version special is that Jandek came up with this chilling little melody on both vocals and guitar. So I would say it's the album's best track for new fans.
Jesus, take my will. Jesus, take my will.
The lyrics do seem rather grim. First of all, Take My Will sounds like something you would hear at Alcoholics Anonymous, although there is no mention of drinking. Instead, the narrator is about to board a train, and leave town for good, but not before saying goodbye to his lover or friend on the payphone. The only money he has left is a $2 bill, which I understand because I would never spend the one I have. Still, I can imagine his anxiety about the future, so I can see why he's asking Jesus for help. Because of the aforementioned melody, and the emotion I hear in Jandek's voice, I have always thought of Take My Will as one of his darker songs of the time. However, I enjoy it no matter how I'm feeling, especially since its placement towards the end of the record is effective. So before I sign off once again, I just want to say it feels good to post this review just before my Memorial Day trip down south. After plenty of work at my job and summer semester, I will certainly be glad to get away. It reminds me of when I ironically posted Somebody in the Snow while spring was starting. As for today's album, there is a good reason it's part of the comfort zone I mentioned in Tale of a Jandek Fan. With a strong top 3 in the track list, 6 very interesting tracks, and a more refined sound than last time, this is Jandek at his finest in the mid to late 90s, even though he still has some tricks up his sleeve for albums like the next one. However, if you've been following the world of Jandek lately, you know there's something bigger to talk about.